Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am your host, Brian Scott. I'm delighted to return to Rudolf Steiner today. Check out my previous episode where I kind of give some history behind Rudolf Steiner. He was an amazing theosophical writer that fought Adolf Hitler 20 years before he came into power, and they went after him. And a lot of his work is very similar to Manly P. Hall. He had a tremendous amount of knowledge about the unseen forces in the other world. In a recent episode, I also read a book by Manly P. Hall called Unseen Forces. And in it, he kind of goes over those entities in the other worlds. There's a discussion in that one about the guardian at the threshold. I found some additional information from Rudolf Steiner in his wonderful book, How to Know Higher Worlds, on meeting the guardians. The reason I thought this would be good is as I research the New Earth and I try to put together a sort of manual, it appears in a lot of occult literature, there's sort of a guardian that is there between the different worlds, and this guardian may be a part of the transition into the New Earth. It's been a part of the transition through death, as documented in a lot of works. Rudolf Steiner was a terrific writer. He sort of was a spiritual scientist, and some of his stuff is very fascinating. And in this particular collection, he's talking about the lesser guardian and the greater guardian, and a discussion of this might give you some additional information that you may need someday as we start to move into these other worlds. It still goes along with what we still have to do as we move towards death, a sort of recapitulation of working with our past. It's a spiritual path. I have also discussed the guardian in another episode through Quo, where Quo talks about finding your guardian. And it is not the same as the higher self or the guardian angel. These are two specific entities, and I will let Rudolf Steiner explain it to you. It's very fascinating. Meeting the guardians. Central to the spiritual work on inner development is what Rudolf Steiner calls, following Bulwer Lytton, who introduced the term in his Rosicrucian novel Zanoni, the meeting with the guardian of the threshold. Although a great deal could and ought to be said of this pivotal spiritual experience, the following passages from How to Know Higher Worlds are more or less self-explanatory and must suffice. The lesser guardian. Among the most important experiences in the ascent to higher worlds are the encounters with the so-called guardian of the threshold. Actually, there are two such beings, not one. They are known as the lesser and the greater guardians. We meet the first when the connection between willing, thinking, and feeling in the finer astral and ether bodies begins to loosen. The second, greater guardian, is encountered when the separation of these three forces also affects the physical body, particularly the brain. The lesser guardian of the threshold is an independent being who does not exist for us until we have reached the appropriate level of inner development. Within the framework of this book, therefore, only a brief description of the guardian's essential characteristics are given. First, an attempt will be made to give a narrative description of the meeting with this guardian. It is only through this meeting, in fact, we become aware that the implanted connection between thinking, feeling, and willing has been undone. A thoroughly horrid, ghostly being stands before us. Hence, we shall need full presence of mind and complete confidence in the safety and reliability of our cognitive path, which we have had ample opportunity to acquire in the course of our training for this encounter. The guardian then reveals the meaning of this moment in words, somewhat as follows. Up till now, unseen by you, mighty powers presided over you. Through all the previous courses of your lives, they brought it about that every good deed was followed by its reward, and every evil action was followed by its grievous consequences. Through their influence, your character was formed out of your life experiences and thoughts. They were the agents of your destiny. They determined on the basis of your conduct in previous lives the measure of joy and pain allotted to you in each of your incarnations. They ruled over you in the form of the all-embracing law of karma. These powers will now begin to loosen the reins by which they guide you, Now, you yourself must do some of the work they did for you before. Up to now, you endured many heavy blows of fate. You did not know why. Each was the consequence of a damaging deed done in a previous life. You found joy and happiness and took these as you found them. These too were the result of earlier actions. You have many beautiful sides to your character and many ugly flaws. You yourself produced these through your past experiences and thoughts. Up to now, you were unaware of this. Only the effects were known to you. But the karmic powers witnessed all your former actions and even your most secret thoughts and feelings. And on that basis, they determined who you are now and how you live in your present incarnation. Now, however, all the good and bad aspect of your past lives are to be revealed to you. You will see them for yourself. They've been interwoven with your being all along. They were in you and you could not see them, just as you cannot see your brain with your eyes. Now, however, your past actions are separating themselves from you, stepping out of your personality. They are assuming an independent form, one that you can see, as you can see the stones and plants of the outside world. I am that self-same being who made a body for itself out of your good and your wicked deeds. My ghostly form is spun, so to speak, from the account book of your life. Up to now, you have carried me invisibly within you. It was for your sake that this was so. It meant that the hidden wisdom of your destiny continued to work within you to eliminate the ugly spots in my appearance. Now that I have come forth from you, this hidden wisdom has also left you and will take care of you no longer. Instead, it puts the work in your own hands. I myself, if I am not to fall into corruption, must become a perfect and glorious being. For were I to fall, I would drag you down with me into a dark, corrupted world. To prevent this, your own wisdom must be great enough to take over the task previously performed by the hidden wisdom now departed from you. I shall never leave your side once you have crossed my threshold. I shall always be there beside you in a form you can perceive. From then on, whenever you think or act wrongly, you will immediately see your fault as an ugly, demonic distortion in my appearance. My being will be changed and become radiantly beautiful only when you have made amends for all your wrongs and have so purified yourself that you become incapable of further evil. Then, too, I shall be able to unite with you again as a single being in order to bless and benefit your further activity. My threshold is built of every feeling of fear still within you, and every feeling of reluctance in the face of the strength you need to take on full responsibility for your thoughts and actions. As long as you still harbor any trace of fear at directing your own destiny, the threshold lacks an essential element. As long as a single stone is missing, you will remain on this threshold, as if spellbound or stumble. Therefore, do not try to cross this threshold until you are completely free of fear and feel yourself ready for the highest responsibility. Until now, I have left you only when death called you from an earthly life. But even then, my form was veiled from your eyes. Only the powers of destiny presiding over you could see me. During the interval between death and rebirth, based on my appearance, they formed in you the forces and faculties to enable you to work to make me beautiful in your next life, and so ensure the well-being of your progress. Thus it was I and my imperfections that made the powers of destiny send you back to a new earthly incarnation. When you died, I was there. It was for my sake that the rulers of karma decided that you must reincarnate. If, without knowing it, you were to transform and perfect me through life forever renewed in this way, then you could avoid falling into the powers of death. But then you would have become completely one with me, and united, we would pass into immortality. Now I stand visible before you, as I have always stood invisible beside you in the hour of your death. Once you have crossed my threshold, you will enter realms you otherwise entered only after physical death. Now, you will enter them in full knowledge. From now on, though living outwardly and visibly upon earth, you will live at the same time in the realm of death, that is, in the realm of eternal life. Indeed, I am your angel of death. At the same time, I also bring you never-ending higher life. While still living in the body, you will die through me and experience rebirth into indestructible existence. In the realm you are henceforth entering, you will meet beings of a suprasensory kind. Bliss will be your share in this realm. Yet I who am your own creation, must be your first acquaintance in this world. Earlier I lived on your life, but now, through you, I have awakened to an independent existence of my own and stand before you as the visible standard of your future actions, and perhaps also as a constant reproach. You have been able to create me, and in so doing have taken on the duty of transforming me. What is indicated here in narrative form must not be understood only symbolically. It is, on the contrary, in the highest degree, an absolutely real experience, which any student pursuing esoteric training to the appropriate level can have. The Guardian's function is to warn us not to go any further unless we feel strong enough to meet the challenges contained in the words addressed to us. Horrid as it may be, the Guardian's appearance is, after all, but the consequence of our own past lives. It is only our own character awakened to an independent life outside of us. The awakening of our character to an independent existence occurs as our thinking, willing, and feeling begin to separate. It is already a deep, meaningful experience to feel for the first time that we have given birth to a spiritual being. The whole purpose of our preparation, our esoteric training, is to enable us to bear the awful sight of the Guardian without any trace or fear or aversion. When we meet the Guardian, we must feel our strength so grown that we can take upon ourselves the task of the Guardian's transformation and enhancement in full knowledge and consciousness. As a result of passing the meeting with the Guardian of the threshold successfully, our next physical death is quite a different event than before. Dying becomes a conscious experience for us in which we lay aside our physical body. Like a garment that is worn out, so torn that it is no longer usable. In a sense, our physical death will then upset only those close to us whose outlook and perceptions are still limited to the material world. In their eyes, we die, but nothing important changes for us in our surroundings. For before we die, the whole suprasensory world that we enter with death is already open to us, and after dying, it remains open to us as before. The Guardian of the threshold is also connected with something else. Each of us belong to a family, a people, a race. Our activity in this world depends upon our belonging to such a unit. Even our individual personality is related to it. In fact, our membership in a family, a nation, or a race affects not only our conscious activities, for every family, nation, and race has its own destiny, but as each has its own particular character. As long as our perspective is limited to the material world, however, such realities remain merely general concepts. Materialistically biased thinkers regard with contempt any esoteric scientist who attributes family or national characteristics and lineal or racial destinies to beings whom they consider just as real as the individuality to whom they attribute personality and destiny. Yet such esoteric scientists have come to know worlds of which our individual personalities are parts, just as our arms, legs, and head are parts of our body. The life of families, nations, and races is affected thus not only by the individuals who belong to them, but also by family souls, nation souls, and race spirits. These are real beings. In a sense, as individuals, we are only the instruments, the executive organs, so to speak, of these family souls and race spirits. Indeed, we may say, for example, that the soul of a nation or people makes use of the individuals who belong to it to accomplish certain tasks. This folk soul does not descend to the sense-perceptible world. It remains in the higher realms. To work in the physical world, the folk soul of a nation makes use of individual human beings as physical organs. This process is analogous on a higher level to civil engineer in the material world making use of construction workers to execute the details of a project. In the truest sense, we each receive our allotted human task from our family, nation, or race soul, As long as our experience is limited to the sense-perceptible world, we are not initiated into the higher purpose of which this task is a part, but work unconsciously toward the goals of our group souls. As soon as we encounter the guardian of the threshold, however, we not only know our own personal tasks, but also have to work consciously to help accomplish those of our people and our race. Thus, each expansion of our horizon also extends the sphere of our responsibility. The actual process underlying this revelation at the threshold is the adding of a new body to our subtler body. This is much like putting on a new garment. Previously, we moved through the world clothed only in the sheaths that envelope our personality. Higher spirits making use of our personality oversaw what we had to do for our community, our nation, and our race. Now, however, the guardian of the threshold reveals to us these spirits will no longer take care of us. From now on, they withdraw their guiding hands. We must therefore leave behind all belonging to communities. Yet, as isolated individuals, we would wholly harden within ourselves and fall into ruin if we did not acquire the powers inherent in the spirits of our race and nation. While many people certainly believe they have freed themselves fully from all tribal and racial connections and are simply human and nothing else, we have to wonder what made this freedom possible for them. After all, were they not given their place in the world by their family, and have not their lineage, nation, and race made them what they are? Their lineage, nation, and race have taught and educated them. They owe their ability to transcend tribal and racial prejudices to this education. Lineage, nation, and race have enabled them to become the light bearers and benefactors of their tribe or even their race. Thus, even though those people claim to be no more than simply human, they owe the ability to make such claims to the spirits of their communities. In fact, only when we follow the paths to inner knowledge, we experience what it really means to have left behind all tribal, national, and racial connections and to be abandoned by the spirits of nation, tribe, and race. Indeed, it is on the esoteric path that we first experience for ourselves the meaninglessness of the education for the life we are now entering that all these connections have given us. For as soon as the threads joining willing, thinking, and feeling begin to snap, all that has been instilled in us completely dissolves. We then look back upon the results of our previous upbringings, as if we were watching our house crumble into individual bricks that we must then rebuild in a new form. It is much more than a mere figure of speech when we are told that after the guardian begins to speak, a whirlwind arises from the place where the guardian stands, extinguishing all the spiritual lights that illuminated our life up to now. Utter darkness then surrounds us, broken only by the radiance streaming from the guardian. Out of this darkness, we hear the guardian exhorting us, "Do not cross my threshold until you fully understand that you, yourself, have to illuminate the darkness before you. Do not take a single step forward until you are absolutely sure that you have enough fuel in your own lamp, because the lamps of those who have guided you up to now will no longer be there in the future." Following these words, we must turn and cast our gaze behind us. The guardian of the threshold now pulls aside the curtain that hitherto veiled life's deep mysteries from us. Now the spirits of tribe, nation, and race are revealed in their full reality. We see clearly we have now been guided in the past, and that now this guidance is no more. This is the second warning we receive at the threshold from its guardian. No one could bear the sight described here without preparation. The higher training that enables to reach the threshold helps us at the same time to find the necessary strength when we need it. In fact, our training can proceed so harmoniously that when we enter this new life, we do so without drama or tumult. Our experiences at the threshold are then accompanied by a premonition of that bliss, which will be the keynote of our newly awakened life. The sensation of our new freedom outweighs all other feelings, and in the light of this sensation, our new duties and responsibilities seem natural and inevitable at our given stage of life. The greater guardian. We have showed that the significance of the encounter with the so-called lesser guardian of the threshold lies in the fact that in this meeting we perceive a suprasensory being that we ourselves have to some extent created. For the body of this being is made up of the results previously invisible to us of our own actions, feelings, and thoughts. Unbeknownst to us, these invisible powers became the causes of our destiny and personality, and from this moment on we realize how we ourselves laid the foundations of our present life in the past. In this way, our own being begins to become transparent to us. For example, certain tendencies and habits live within us. Now we realize why we have these. We have met with certain strokes of fate. Now we recognize where these come from. We understand why we love some things and hate others, why some things make us happy and others cause us unhappiness. That is, we come to understand our visible life on the basis of its invisible causes. Even the essential facts of life, such as illness and health, birth and death, are unveiled before our sight. We realize that we wove the causes that led us to return to life before we were born. We come to know, too, the being within us that is created but unfinished in this visible world, the being that can be finished and perfected only in this same visible, perceptible world. For the opportunity to work on the completion of this being does not exist in any world other than this. Thus, we recognize that death cannot permanently separate us from this world. Inwardly, we realize, once I entered this world for the first time, because I am a being who needs life in this world in order to acquire qualities I cannot acquire in any other world, and I must remain connected to this world until I have developed everything within me that can be found there. One day, because I have acquired all the faculties I need in this sense-perceptible visible world, I shall become a useful co-worker in another world. In other words, one of the most important experiences we gain from initiation is that we learn to know and to treasure the true value of the visible sense-perceptible world better than we could before our esoteric training. Indeed, only through insight into the suprasensory worlds do we realize the value of the sense-perceptible world. A person who has not experienced this insight and thus perhaps believes that the suprasensory regions are of infinite, incomparable worth may underestimate the sense-perceptible world. But those who have had insight into the suprasensory know that without their experiences in the visible world, they would be quite powerless in the invisible worlds. To live in the invisible worlds, we must have the tools and faculties appropriate to them. We can develop those only in the visible world. For example, if we are to become aware of the invisible worlds, we must learn to see spiritually. This power of spiritual vision in a higher world develops only gradually by means of experiences in the lower worlds. A person who has not previously developed these eyes in the sensible world can just as little be born with spiritual eyes in a spiritual world as a child could be born with physical eyes if these had not been developed in the mother's body. We can now understand why the threshold to the suprasensory world is protected by a guardian. For under no circumstances could we be allowed a true insight into these realms if we had not first developed the necessary faculties. And this is the reason why, if we have not yet developed the ability to work in other worlds, a veil is drawn across our experiences when we die and enter these realms. That is, we may not behold the suprasensory worlds until we are ready and mature enough to do so. When we enter the suprasensory worlds, life takes on a completely new meaning for us. We see that the sensible world is the fertile soil, the living medium or substratum of a higher world. Indeed, in a certain sense, this higher world seems incomplete without the lower one. Two vistas then open up before us, one into the past, the other into the future. We see into a past in which the physical, sensible world did not yet exist. The prejudice that the suprasensory spiritual world developed out of the sensible world lies far behind us now. We know that the suprasensory world came first, and that the sensible physical world developed out of it. At this point, our vision turns toward the future, revealing a higher level of the suprasensory world. Here, we find fruits first formed in the sense-perceptible physical world. The sense world we know today will have been overcome by then, but its results will have been incorporated into a higher world. We see that before we entered the physical world for the first time, we ourselves belong to a suprasensible world, and that this suprasensible world too had to pass through life in the sensible world in order to develop further. Its further evolution was impossible unless it passed through the physical realm. Indeed, only if certain things evolved with the appropriate faculties in the physical realm could the suprasensible realm advance in its evolution. We are those beings. Human beings, as we are today, arise at a level of spiritual existence that is incomplete, imperfect. Within this level, we are in the process of being led to a stage of completion that will enable us to continue our work in the higher world. We can now begin to understand the meaning of illness and death in the physical world. Death, after all, merely expresses the fact that the supersensible world had previously reached a point beyond which it could not advance by its own efforts. Universal death would have overtaken it if it had not received a new life impulse. This new life has become a struggle against universal death. Out of the ruins of a withering, inwardly solidifying world, the buds of a new world blossomed. This is why our world contains both death and life, and why things are gradually intermingling. The dying parts of the old world still cling to the seeds of the new life, developing out of them. We can see this most clearly expressed in ourselves. The sheath we bear has been preserved from old world, but the seed of the being that will live in the future is already growing within it. Hence, as human beings, we have double nature, mortal and immortal. Our mortal being is in its final stages. Our immortal being is only beginning, but only within the twofold world, mortal and immortal, whose expression is the sense-perceptible physical world. Can we acquire the faculties that will lead to immortality? Our task is to harvest from the mortal world fruits from the immortal. When we contemplate our being, when we see ourselves have built up in the past, we must say to ourselves, we bear within ourselves the elements of a dying world. These elements work within us, yet gradually, with the help of the new immortal elements awakening within us, we are able to break their power. In this way, our path takes us from death to life. Indeed, if we were conscious in the hour of death, we would realize the dying world was our teacher. The fact that we die is a result of all the past with which we are interwoven. But the field of mortality has prepared seeds of immortality for us. We carry these with us into another world. If everything depended only on the past, we would never have been born. The past, its life ends with birth. Life in the sensible world is wrested from the universal death by the new seed of life. The time between birth and death is simply an expression of how much the new life can wring from the dying past. An illness is but the consequence of the part of this past that is dying. Here we find an answer to the question, why must we work our way only gradually from error and imperfection to truth and goodness? Our actions and feelings and thoughts begin under the rulership of what passes and dies away. Out of what passes away, our perceptible physical organs evolve and are fashioned. As a result, these organs and all that stimulates them are doomed to perish and die away. We will not therefore find anything immortal in our instincts, drives, and passions, nor in the organs belonging to them. We will find immortality only in what appears as their product, in the work done by these organs. Only when we have drawn out of this perishable world all that there is to be drawn out of it, will we be able to cast aside the foundation we have outgrown, which manifests itself in the physical, sensible world. Thus, the first guardian of the threshold replicates our dual nature as human beings, consisting of mixed mortal and immortal elements, and thereby this guardian clearly reveals to us what still needs to be done to attain the sublime light capable of dwelling again in the world of pure spirit. The first guardian makes graphically clear how entangled we are with the physical, sensible world. This entanglement is expressed first of all by the presence of instincts, drives, passions, egotistic desires, and all forms of self-interest. It manifests too in our belonging to a race, a nation, and so forth. Peoples and races are, after all, merely different developmental stages in our evolution toward a pure humanity. The more perfectly that individual members of a race or people express the pure ideal human type, the more they have worked their way through from the physical and mortal to the supersensible and immortal realm, the higher this race or nation is. Human evolution, through repeated incarnations in ever higher nations and races, is thus a process of liberation. In the end, we must all appear in harmonious perfection. We perfect ourselves likewise as we pass through ever pure moral and religious convictions, for every stage of moral development still harbors some yearnings for what is perishable, as well as idealistic seeds of the future. What the lesser guardian of the threshold shows us are only the results of time that has passed. The seeds of the future are present only to the extent they have been woven into the guardian in the past. But human beings are called upon to bring with them into the future supersensible world all that they can gain from the material world. Were we to bring with us only what was woven into our image from the past, we would accomplish only a part of our earthly task. That is why, after a certain period of time, the lesser guardian of the threshold is joined by a greater guardian. What takes place in the form of this meeting with the second, a greater guardian, will once again be described in narrative form. After we have recognized in the lesser guardian those things from which we need to free ourselves, a magnificent form of light comes to meet us on the path. The beauty of this form is difficult to describe in ordinary language. The meeting takes place when our physical organs of thinking, feeling, and willing have so separated from each other, and even from the physical body, that they themselves no longer regulate their mutual interaction. Instead, higher consciousness, now detached completely from physical conditions, regulates their relations. As a result, our organs of thinking, feeling, and willing have become instruments under the control of the soul, which exercises its rulership from the supersensible realms. The soul, freed in this way from all sensory bonds, now encounters the second guardian of the threshold, who speaks somewhat as follows. You have freed yourself from the world of the senses. You have earned the right of citizenship in the supersensible world. From now on, you may work from there. For yourself, you no longer need your physical body nature in its present form. If all you wanted was to acquire the capacity to dwell in the supersensible world, you would never need to return to the world of the senses. Look at me. See how immeasurably I am raised above all that you have already made of yourself up to now. You have reached your present stage of completion by means of faculties that were able to develop in the sense world while you were still dependent upon it. Now, you are entering a time when the powers you liberated must continue to work upon this sense world. Until now, you have worked only to free yourself, but now that you are free, you can help free all your fellow beings in the sense world. Up to now, you have striven as an individual. Now you must join yourself to the whole, so that you may bring with you into the supersensible realm not only yourself, but also all else that exists in the sensible world. Someday you will be able to unite with my form, but I myself cannot find perfect blessedness as long as there are others who are still unfortunate. As a single liberated individual, you could enter the realm of the supersensible today, but then you would have to look down upon those sentient beings who are not yet freed. You would have separated your destiny from theirs, but you are linked together with all sentient beings. All of you had to descend into the world of the senses to draw from it the powers required for a higher world. Were you to separate yourself from your fellow beings, you would misuse the powers you were able to develop only in consort with them. If they had not descended into the sense world, you would not have been able to descend either. Without them, you would lack the powers you need for supersensible existence. You must share with the others the powers that you achieved with them. Therefore, I refuse to admit you to the highest regions of the supersensible world until you have used all your powers for the deliverance of your fellow world and fellow beings. What you have already achieved entitles you to dwell in the lower regions of the supersensible world, but I will stand at the doorway to the higher regions, like the cherubim with the flaming sword before the gates of paradise. I will deny you entry as long as you still have powers that you have not put to use in the sense world. If you do not use your own powers, others will come who will put them to use. Then a high, supersensible world will incorporate all the fruit of the sensible realm, but the ground you stand on will be pulled out from under your feet. The purified world will develop over and beyond you. You will be excluded from it. If this is your choice, then yours is the black path, but those from whom you separate yourself tread the white path. In this way, the great guardian of the threshold announces his presence soon after the meeting with the first guardian. The initiates now know precisely what awaits those who yield to the temptations of a premature stay in the supersensory realms. The second guardian of the threshold emits an indescribable radiance. Union with this guardian is a distant goal for the beholding soul. Yet, the certainty is also present that such a union is possible only after all the powers that have flowed into us from this world have been expended in the service of liberating and redeeming it. Should we therefore decide to meet the demands of this higher being of light, we will be able to contribute to the liberating of the human race. We will then offer up our gifts and talents on the sacrificial altar of humanity. But if we prefer our own premature ascent into the supersensory world, then the stream of humanity will pass over and beyond us. Once we have liberated ourselves, we can no longer win any new powers for ourselves from the world of the senses. If, therefore, we still place our work at the disposal of the sense world, we do so knowing that we are thereby renouncing any gain for ourselves from the place of our future effort. But even when the choices are presented so clearly, it cannot be said that taking the white path is a matter of course. What we choose, after all, depends on whether we have sufficiently purified ourselves of all traces of selfishness so that at the time of making the decision, the allure of personal salvation and blessedness no longer tempts us. This temptation of personal salvation on the black path is the greatest we can conceive of. The white path, on the other hand, does not seem tempting at all. It does not appeal to our egotism. What we receive in the higher regions of the supersensible realms when we take the white path is not something for ourselves, but only something that flows from us, namely love for the world and our fellow beings around us. But on the black path, nothing that our egotism desires is denied us. On the contrary, the fruit of this path is precisely the complete satisfaction of egotism. Thus, those seeking salvation only for themselves will almost certainly choose the black path. In their case, indeed, it is appropriate. Clearly, therefore, we must not expect esotericists on the white path to provide any instructions for the development of our egotistic I. They have no interest whatsoever in the bliss and salvation of the individual. As far as a white occultist is concerned, each one of us must attain such salvation for ourselves. It is not their task to accelerate this process. What matters to them is the evolution and liberation of all beings, human beings and their fellow beings. Therefore, their task is only to indicate how we can train our powers for collaboration in this work. Thus, sacrifice above all other virtues. Nevertheless, they reject no one outright, for even the most egotistic can purify themselves. All the same, those seeking only for themselves, as long as they do so, will get nothing from such occultists. Even though true esotericists will never refuse to help a seeker, such seekers may well deprive themselves of the fruit of their helping guidance. Therefore, if we truly follow the instructions of a good esoteric teacher, we will understand the demand that the second guardian makes after we have crossed the threshold. Indeed, if we fail to follow such a teacher's instructions, we cannot expect ever to reach the threshold at all. The instructions of true esoteric teachers lead to the good, or they lead to nothing. To guide us to an egotistic salvation and mere existence in the supersensible world is not their task. On the contrary, their task from the start is to keep us at a distance from the super-earthly world until we can enter it with a will dedicated to full and selfless collaboration. And that concludes Meeting the Guardians by Rudolf Steiner. The reason I chose this is how profoundly it links to the law of one. And I do believe that the second guardian probably is the higher self. The higher self is 6.5 density, so it's millions of years in the future. The first guardian may block you, and that is you. There is an entity that you meet, and of course, there's going to be a point where you're going to be scared to death. This horrifying, huge, ugly entity. And so a lot of people are scared back into incarnation when they encounter this entity. But if you encounter this entity in what feels like a dream world or the afterlife or between life or in the astral, whenever, at any time, and it's very likely that you'll meet this guardian before you die, so perhaps in a dream or meditation, and you see some entity that scares you, don't run away from it. It's you. That entity is you. And you can change it. That entity will change. It's a reflection of where you've come from and where you're at. And for you to cross into the next threshold, into the next world, you need to change that. You can do it through love. But ultimately, once you've gone beyond that threshold, the next most important thing is not about gaining power for yourself or doing anything in particular for yourself. You probably got into this so that you could help yourself out, just like I did. You might be struggling with your finances or a relationship or your health, and you got all that stuff back now. And then you start to move beyond that stuff because that stuff doesn't matter. It's automatic. It's not about you. It's about being of service to others, and it's fun. It's exciting. It gives you incredible joy. So these entities are guiding you along that path. You're built with an ego, and it sort of makes you somewhat biased towards service to self until you understand what the ego is. Check out my interview with Aaron Abke, the most recent one, where we talked about the ego. It's very fascinating. Have you met the guardian at the threshold? And if you did, I want to hear all about it. Have you met the greater guardian? If you've been following the podcast, my question to you then is the dream emissary that is discussed in Carlos Castaneda, the guardian at the threshold. Somebody did make a comment on that video. Perhaps it's the guardian at the threshold. Maybe it's not. Many people claim to meet their guardian or their higher self or their spirit guides. These could all be related. They could not be related. I have an impression that a lot of it is different for everyone. But there is a being that you sort of start to create that is your greater garment. And perhaps the same thing that Neville Goddard is talking about. But that is a reflection of you. So there's still stages to this. It's very interesting when you read more from this book and a lot of other books beyond Rudolf Steiner, particularly Manly P. Hall. A lot of the initiations of secret societies involved this process that we're talking about and actually encountering the guardian as a part of their initiation. The encountering of the guardian is a part of these initiations of these mystery schools and the Melchizedek schools. They are training you to encounter these guardians on a subconscious level, so what happens in the future. So the purpose of this podcast is simply to make you aware of this. You can find more information by looking up Rudolf Steiner or The Guardian at the Threshold and the book Zanoni by Bulwer Lytton, as well as a number of other books, Unseen Forces by Manly P. Hall. If you have any other materials, put them in the comments and let's learn more about this. If you have encountered the Guardian, tell me about it. I want to know about it. Let's use the comments as a way of sharing this information because there's some commonality in our experience, clearly, because there are commonalities in these writings. So So I can't wait to hear what you have to say. In any case, all episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. Put a like on this video, subscribe, and welcome to The Reality Revolution.